The congressional hearing room buzzed with anticipation as cameras focused on what should have been a routine Judiciary Committee session. Instead, viewers were about to witness one of the most stunning political confrontations in recent Washington history. Stephen Miller, the former senior advisor to President Trump, known for his hard-edged rhetoric on immigration policy, sat confidently at the witness table. Across from him, Representative Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone, reviewing her notes with calm determination. What began as standard questioning suddenly escalated when Miller interrupted Crockett mid-sentence, his face betraying barely concealed contempt. "Congresswoman, let me stop you right there," Miller said sharply, leaning forward. "Maybe this is what they taught at your second-rate law school. But in the real world, policy is made by people who understand practical realities, not academic theories." The chamber fell silent at this unexpected personal attack. Committee members exchanged uncomfortable glances as Miller continued his condescending critique of Crockett's educational background, gesturing dismissively toward her. But what happened next left everyone in the room frozen in shock. Within seconds, Miller's expression transformed from smug certainty to visible discomfort as Crockett delivered a response so precisely calibrated, so devastatingly effective, that staffers behind the dais began exchanging wide-eyed glances. Camera operators scrambled to capture every angle of what was unfolding. The committee chairman's hand hovered over his gavel, unsure whether to intervene in a moment that would soon become one of the most shared political exchanges in social media history. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping political confrontations that reveal the true character of America's most influential figures. Hit the notification bell so you never miss these historic moments as they unfold on the national stage. Stephen Miller, 39, had built his reputation as one of Washington's most polarizing political operatives. His rise to prominence came through his work crafting some of the previous administration's most controversial policies, particularly on immigration. With his trademark combative style and unyielding positions, Miller had cultivated an image as a fearless defender of nationalist policies against what he often characterized as weak, ineffective liberalism. Born and raised in Santa Monica, California, Miller had shown an interest in conservative politics from an early age, writing controversial columns for his high school newspaper before attending Duke University. His path to power had been marked by unwavering adherence to his hardline views and a talent for articulating them in ways that resonated with the base of his party, known for his television appearances where he rarely conceded ground. Miller had developed a reputation for overwhelming opponents with rapid-fire talking points and dismissive rhetoric. "Debates aren't won with facts alone," he once remarked in a profile for a conservative magazine. "They're won by controlling the narrative and never showing weakness." Behind his public persona was a meticulous policy architect who had studied immigration law extensively, though always through a particular ideological lens. His confident demeanor in hearings stemmed from years of preparation and an almost encyclopedic knowledge of his preferred statistics and precedents. During his government service, Miller had been the driving force behind numerous executive orders, policy memos, and regulations that transformed America's immigration system. His defenders praised him as a brilliant strategist willing to make tough decisions. His critics viewed him as the architect of unnecessarily cruel policies disconnected from American values and legal traditions. Today's hearing wasn't Miller's first congressional appearance, but it was perhaps his most high-profile since leaving government. Conservative lawmakers had invited him, specifically to counter progressive arguments about asylum reform, a calculated move to bring his combative style to a debate that had largely been dominated by humanitarian concerns in recent months. Seated across from him was Representative Jasmine Crockett, 43, representing Texas's 30th congressional district. Though only in her second term, Crockett had quickly established herself as a formidable presence on Capitol Hill, known for her exceptional legal mind and composed demeanor under pressure. Before entering politics, Crockett had built a distinguished career as a civil rights attorney in Texas, handling complex cases involving voting rights and criminal justice reform. A graduate of Rhodes College and the University of Houston Law Center, she had worked as both a public defender and in private practice. earning a reputation for thorough preparation and unflappable courtroom presence. What made Crockett particularly effective was her unique combination of academic rigor and practical experience representing clients from diverse backgrounds. Her district encompassed communities ranging from wealthy urban neighborhoods to struggling working-class areas, giving her first-hand insight into how policies affected people across economic and social spectrums. "I didn't run for office to win arguments," she had told her staff during her first campaign. "I ran to make sure every voice in my district gets heard in the rooms where decisions are made." Her approach to congressional hearings reflected her courtroom background. Unlike colleagues who used their questioning time primarily for speeches aimed at social media clips, Crockett was known for methodical, evidence-based inquiries that often revealed contradictions or weaknesses in witness testimony. Several viral moments from previous hearings had established her reputation as someone who came extraordinarily well prepared. The hearing that brought these two powerful personalities into direct conflict concerned proposed changes to asylum policies. Miller had been invited by the Republican majority to testify as an expert witness, while Democrats on the committee, including Crockett, were questioning the humanitarian implications of the stricter standards being proposed. The stakes were high for both participants. For Miller, this appearance represented an opportunity to reassert his influence on immigration policy and potentially shape upcoming legislation. For Crockett, it was a chance to challenge what she viewed as harmful policies that would affect vulnerable communities, both in her district and nationwide. What neither anticipated was that their confrontation would transcend policy disagreements and become a defining moment in how credentials, expertise, and respect intersect in public discourse, one that would force viewers to reconsider what truly constitutes qualification for shaping national policy. The tension had been building from the moment Crockett began her questioning. The committee room was arranged in the classic congressional hearing setup. Witnesses seated at the long table facing the elevated dais where members of Congress sat in leather chairs, name placards displayed prominently before them. Behind the scenes, committee staffers were already exchanging text messages anticipating fireworks. Miller had spent the morning before the hearing reviewing briefing materials, highlighting passages with a red pen and preparing responses to expected lines of questioning. Crockett had arrived early, spending an hour in her office reviewing Miller's previous testimony and policy positions. The hearing began with standard procedural formalities before the committee chairman recognized Crockett for her 5-minute questioning period. She started with measured inquiries about specific provisions in the proposed asylum changes. "Mr. Miller, the proposal suggests raising the credible fear standard for asylum seekers. How would this affect those fleeing documented persecution?" she asked. Miller leaned toward his microphone. "Congresswoman, the current standard is being exploited. These changes would ensure only legitimate claims move forward while deterring those gaming the system." "Could you define what constitutes gaming the system?" Crockett pressed. Miller's expression tightened slightly. "When people with no valid claim use asylum as a backdoor immigration method." "The data clearly shows." "Which data specifically are you referring to?" Crockett interrupted. "Because DHS statistics indicate that over 70% of asylum seekers who pass initial screenings are eventually found to have legitimate claims when given full hearings." This pattern continued for several exchanges, Crockett asking specific, technically precise questions, and Miller responding with broader assertions that she then challenged with contrary data. The rhythm of their exchange began to draw attention from other committee members, some of whom were now watching with increased interest, rather than checking their phones. From the press table, reporters looked up from their laptops, sensing the escalating tension. In the control room where the hearing was being broadcast, a producer spoke into his headset. "Stay on this exchange. Two-shot when possible." Miller's frustration became increasingly visible as Crockett continued methodically challenging his claims. His responses grew shorter and his tone more dismissive. "Mr. Miller," Crockett continued, "you've repeatedly referenced overwhelming abuse of the asylum system. But the tract database from Syracuse University indicates that representation, not fraudulent claims, is the strongest predictor of asylum success rates." "Have you reviewed that research?" "Congresswoman," Miller replied, his voice taking on a sharper edge. With all due respect, these academic studies don't reflect the reality on the ground. People who actually enforce our laws understand. Are you suggesting that empirical research is irrelevant to policymaking? Crockett asked calmly. The camera caught a subtle shift in the dynamics among committee members. A senior Republican who had been supportive of Miller's invitation now leaned back in his chair, watching with narrowed eyes. Two Democratic representatives exchanged quick glances, sensing the momentum shift in the exchange. Miller's expression darkened. This wasn't following his usual pattern of testimony, where he typically dominated exchanges through forceful rhetoric. Crockett was using precisely cited data to systematically dismantle his broader claims. What I'm suggesting, Miller said, leaning forward, is that theoretical frameworks taught in academic settings often fail to address real-world complexities. I'm not citing theory. Mr. Miller, I'm citing documented case outcomes from our own immigration courts, Crockett responded. The room's atmosphere changed subtly as committee members realized they were witnessing an unusually substantive exchange. A congressional staffer near the back of the room whispered to his colleague. She came with receipts from the gallery. Immigration advocates who had attended the hearing expecting another frustrating exercise in political theater sat up straighter, sensing that Crockett was methodically exposing contradictions in Miller's testimony that usually went unchallenged. What made this exchange particularly riveting was the contrast in styles. Miller, known for his fierce advocacy and emotional appeals to security concerns, found himself facing an opponent who refused to engage on those terms. Instead, Crockett maintained a prosecutor's discipline, systematically building a case that Miller's assertions lacked factual foundation. Several journalists in the press section were already drafting leads for their stories. Recognizing that the exchange was departing from the typical partisan talking points that characterized most immigration hearings. One veteran reporter from the Washington Post had covered dozens of similar hearings, but was now witnessing something he considered genuinely newsworthy, a substantive policy debate where evidence, not emotion, was driving the narrative. The exchange continued to escalate, with Miller becoming visibly more frustrated as Crockett remained composed. The gallery began to fill with congressional staffers who had heard something interesting was happening in the Judiciary Committee hearing. Then came the moment that shifted the entire dynamic of the hearing. Crockett asked about specific language in Section 208 of the Immigration and Nationality Act regarding the established grounds for asylum. Miller, apparently irritated by her persistence, responded with unexpected condescension. "Congresswoman, let me stop you right there. Maybe this is what they taught at your second-rate law school, but in the real world, policy is made by people who understand practical realities, not academic theories." A collective intake of breath could be heard throughout the chamber. The committee chairman looked up sharply. Even some Republican members appeared uncomfortable with the personal attack. Crockett paused, looking directly at Miller. The camera caught her expression, not anger, but something closer to clinical assessment. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice still measured but with a new firmness. "I graduated with honors from the University of Houston Law Center, which has produced Supreme Court justices, federal judges, and yes, immigration experts. But since you've decided to make education relevant to this discussion, perhaps you could share your legal credentials with the committee." Miller's face flushed slightly. "I've been crafting immigration policy for years." "That wasn't my question," Crockett interjected calmly. "Do you have legal training or a law degree of any kind?" "My experience in government, a simple yes or no would suffice, Mr. Miller." The room had gone completely silent. Committee members who had been half paying attention were now fully engaged, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. "No," Miller finally answered. "But practical experience, thank you," Crockett said. "To be clear, I'm not suggesting a law degree is necessary to understand these issues. Many community advocates without formal legal training have valuable insights. I'm simply establishing that if we're discussing credentials, we should be accurate." Miller's expression hardened further. "The practical implementation of policy—" "Let me finish, Mr. Miller," Crockett said firmly. "You've spoken for 3 minutes and 12 seconds of my 5-minute questioning period. I have 1 minute and 48 seconds remaining." The precision of her time calculation caught Miller off guard. Behind him, one of the committee clerks discreetly checked the timer and nodded slightly to the chairman, confirming Crockett's assessment was accurate. Miller fell silent, an unusual position for someone accustomed to controlling conversations. The dynamic had shifted dramatically, and everyone in the room could feel it. What had begun as standard testimony had become a masterclass in how preparation and composure could disarm even the most experienced political operators. As her time wound down, Crockett prepared to deliver the response that would leave the entire chamber stunned and transform a congressional hearing into a viral moment that would be studied in communications classes for years to come. Mr. Miller, Crockett began, her voice measured but clear, before I use my remaining time, I want to address something fundamental to this hearing and to our broader discourse on policy. She adjusted her glasses slightly, the gesture drawing attention to her composed demeanor in stark contrast to Miller's increasingly rigid posture. You've repeatedly attempted to dismiss empirical evidence as academic theory while positioning yourself as someone who understands real-world implications. But policy isn't shaped by anecdotes or impressions. It's shaped by data, legal frameworks, and measurable outcomes. Miller opened his mouth to respond, but Crockett continued. When you disparage my education or qualifications, you're not just attacking me. You're suggesting that rigorous analysis is somehow less valuable than your personal interpretations. This approach to policymaking is precisely why many of the initiatives you championed face significant legal challenges, 22 of which were overturned by federal courts. The chamber remained silent as Crockett reached into her folder and removed a single sheet of paper. I've taken the liberty of compiling those court decisions, she said, holding up the document. Would you like me to enter this into the record, Mr. Chairman? The committee chairman nodded, momentarily caught off guard by the methodical dismantling unfolding before him. Miller's expression had transformed from dismissive to defensive. His usual tactic of overwhelming opponents with rapid-fire rhetoric was ineffective against Crockett's evidence-based approach. Congressman, Miller began, attempting to regain control. The courts have often failed to understand the security implications. Mr. Miller, Crockett interrupted calmly. Are you suggesting that federal judges appointed by presidents of both parties systematically misunderstood the law? Or is it possible that the policies themselves failed to meet basic legal standards? This direct challenge to Miller's core narrative, that his approach represented the only pragmatic path forward, hung in the air. The studio crew, typically focused on their technical tasks, were now watching the exchange with undisguised fascination. In the gallery, policy experts from various think tanks exchanged glances. A professor from Georgetown Law, invited as an observer, was furiously taking notes on what had become an unexpected case study in effective congressional questioning. The real issue here, Miller countered, his voice taking on an edge, is that academic elites and activist judges have created a framework that prevents common sense enforcement of our borders. Crockett nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting perspective. Let me ask you this. When the Fifth Circuit, one of the most conservative appellate courts in the country, unanimously rejected your administration's asylum transit ban, were they also academic elites? The specificity of her reference caught Miller off guard. Before he could formulate a response, Crockett continued. The court specifically cited the administration's failure to follow the Administrative Procedure Act, basic regulatory law that first-year law students learn. This wasn't about political ideology. It was about fundamental legal process. She paused, allowing her point to register with everyone in the room. This is why education matters, Mr. Miller. Not as a status symbol, but because understanding legal frameworks prevents precisely the kind of policy failures you oversaw, failures that cost taxpayers millions in litigation and failed to achieve their stated objectives. The room had fallen completely silent. Even members who typically scrolled through their phones during testimony were fully engaged. A senior Republican on the committee shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had expected Miller to dominate the hearing with the forceful style that had made him effective on television. Instead, they were witnessing a methodical exposure of the gap between rhetoric and legal reality. I'd like to enter into the record, Crockett continued, pulling another document from her folder. A summary of the estimated costs of litigation related to policies you championed that were ultimately struck down. The total exceeds $75 million in taxpayer funds, not including the operational costs of implementing and then unwinding these legally flawed initiatives. She slid the document toward the committee clerk, who accepted it with a slight nod. "Let me address something else," Crockett said, her voice maintaining its measured tone. "You've repeatedly characterized asylum seekers as people trying to game the system. Yet when I review the actual case outcomes from immigration courts, I see families fleeing documented persecution who followed our laws by presenting themselves at ports of entry and requesting protection, exactly as our asylum laws prescribe." She looked directly at Miller. "Is following the established legal process for seeking protection what you mean by gaming the system?" This reframing of the narrative, from Miller's characterization of asylum seekers as manipulating loopholes to Crockett's presentation of them as following legal procedures, visibly resonated with several committee members. Miller attempted to interrupt, but Crockett held up her hand. "I still have 45 seconds. Mr. Miller, I'll yield to you when I've completed my time." This simple assertion of her procedural rights, delivered without anger but with absolute firmness, highlighted the contrast in their approaches. Where Miller had attempted to dominate through interruption and dismissal, Crockett was demonstrating mastery of both substance and process. The room remained completely silent as she prepared to deliver her closing remarks. Even the usually restless press corps was fully attentive, recognizing they were witnessing a rare moment of genuine substance in a setting often dominated by political theater. "What I find particularly troubling about your testimony today," Crockett continued, "is not just the factual inconsistencies, but the underlying premise that we must choose between security and humanity. The most effective immigration policies, the ones that stand up to legal scrutiny and achieve their objectives, recognize that these values are complementary, not contradictory." She glanced down at her notes briefly, then looked back at Miller with calm intensity. "Your dismissal of legal education reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how durable policy is created in a constitutional democracy. Laws that ignore constitutional constraints aren't tough, they're ineffective. They waste resources, create bureaucratic chaos, and ultimately fail to achieve even their stated security objectives." Several committee members were now taking their own notes, clearly impressed by the substantive nature of Crockett's critique. "My time is almost expired," Crockett noted, glancing at the clock. "So let me conclude with this. The American people deserve policies based on evidence, not ideology. They deserve representatives who respect expertise rather than dismissing it. And they deserve better than having their intelligence insulted by suggestions that complex problems have simple solutions. If only those pesky courts and laws would get out of the way." Miller's face had reddened, but before he could respond, Crockett delivered her final point. "I didn't attend law school to win arguments. Mr. Miller, I attended to learn how to advocate effectively for justice within our legal system. The difference between us isn't where we studied. It's that I'm still committed to evidence-based policy rather than predetermined outcomes." She turned to the chairman. "I yield back the remainder of my time." The silence that followed was profound. Committee members who had witnessed countless hearings exchanged glances, recognizing they had just observed something extraordinary, not just political theater, but a fundamental challenge to how policy expertise is defined and respected. Miller sat rigidly, his prepared talking points rendered ineffective against Crockett's systematic dismantling of his approach. The chairman, seeming to sense the unprecedented nature of the moment, took longer than usual to recognize the next questioner. In the press gallery, reporters were already drafting headlines. A veteran political journalist whispered to his colleague, "In 15 years covering Congress, I've never seen someone so thoroughly exposed without raising their voice once." As cameras caught Miller taking a sip of water with a slightly trembling hand, it was clear to everyone present that this exchange would extend far beyond the committee room, becoming not just a viral moment, but a case study in how preparation, evidence, and composure can dismantle even the most seasoned political operators. The repercussions of the Crockett-Miller exchange reverberated far beyond the hearing room. Within hours, clips of the confrontation had spread across social media platforms, generating millions of views and thousands of comments. What made this moment uniquely powerful wasn't just another congressional clash, but Crockett's methodical dismantling of Miller's credentials without ever matching his combative tone. Crockett's schools and Twatcher credentials check began trending nationally within hours. The contrast between Miller's dismissive attack and Crockett's evidence-based response resonated across political lines, sparking conversations about substance versus style in political discourse. On cable news that evening, panels across networks found themselves analyzing not just immigration policy, but the nature of expertise itself. On CNN, political analyst David Axelrod noted, "What we witnessed wasn't just a congressional exchange, but a masterclass in how preparation defeats condescension." Even on Fox News, commentators acknowledged that Miller had made a tactical error in attacking Crockett's credentials. "Whether you agree with her politics or not," remarked conservative commentator Tommy Lahren, "going after her education was a mistake. She came armed with facts, and that's how you lose the audience, even if they're on your side." Social media platforms that typically amplified the most divisive content found themselves hosting surprisingly thoughtful discussions about the role of education and expertise in policymaking. TikTok creators produced hundreds of videos analyzing Crockett's technique, with communication coaches highlighting her calm, fact-checking approach. The moment sparked a national conversation about what truly constitutes expertise. Editorial boards across the country published pieces examining the growing distrust of academic and professional credentials in political discourse. The Washington Post ran an op-ed titled, "When Experience Meets Evidence, the Crockett Standard for Public Debate," that received widespread attention. Educators particularly embraced the exchange as a teaching tool. High school government teachers reported using the clip to demonstrate effective civic discourse. One AP government teacher in Ohio told Education Week, "This exchange perfectly illustrates how to challenge assertions with evidence without resorting to personal attacks. It's exactly what we're trying to teach students about productive democratic participation." Memes and remixes of the exchange proliferated across the internet. One particularly viral TikTok featured side-by-side clips of Miller's dismissive comment about Crockett's education, followed by her measured response, set to the song "The Moment" by Tame Impala. It garnered over 12 million views within 48 hours. For Crockett, the impact was immediate and substantial. Her office reported receiving over 15,000 messages in the 48 hours following the hearing, not just from supporters but from Americans across the political spectrum who appreciated her approach, if not necessarily her policy positions. "I strongly disagree with your stance on immigration," wrote one self-identified Republican from Arizona, "but I respect how you conducted yourself. You didn't resort to personal attacks even when provoked. We need more of that kind of professionalism in Washington." Law schools across the country requested permission to use the exchange in their advocacy and legal ethics courses. Professor James Montgomery of Harvard Law told The Washington Post, "Representative Crockett demonstrated precisely what we try to teach our students, that effective advocacy isn't about volume or personal attacks, but about mastery of facts and law." The exchange resonated particularly strongly among young women of color pursuing legal education. Applications to law schools from this demographic saw a measurable increase in the following application cycle, with many personal statements directly citing Crockett as an inspiration. The Dean of Admissions at Howard University Law School told NPR, "We're seeing what we call the Crockett effect. Applicants who explicitly mention wanting to develop the kind of evidence-based advocacy skills she demonstrated. Professional. Organizations representing attorneys of color celebrated Crockett's composure under attack. The National Bar Association issued a statement noting, "Representative Crockett's response exemplifies the professionalism and legal acumen that our members bring to courtrooms, boardrooms, and legislative chambers every day, often in the face of similar unwarranted challenges to their credentials." For Miller, the aftermath proved more complicated. His core supporters initially defended him, accusing the liberal media of blowing the exchange out of proportion. But as the full video spread, including the moment where he was unable to cite his own legal credentials after attacking Crockett's. Even some conservative commentators suggested he had misplayed his hand. Miller's strength has always been controlling the narrative, noted Republican strategist Ana Navarro. But he made the classic mistake of underestimating his opponent and opening a door he couldn't close. Conservative publications found themselves divided in their analysis. National Review published a piece titled "Miller's Miscalculation" that acknowledged the strategic error while still defending the substance of his policy positions. Meanwhile, more populist outlets doubled down, framing the exchange as evidence of elitist academia dismissing practical experience. The impact extended beyond these two individuals to how congressional hearings themselves were conducted. Committee staff reported that members from both parties were requesting more thorough briefing materials before high-profile hearings, with one Democratic communications director telling Politico, "Everyone's asking for the Crockett prep now, deep research on witnesses' backgrounds and previous statements." Congressional offices began investing more resources in specialized policy preparation. One senior Republican aide admitted anonymously to The Hill, "We've always focused on getting good sound bites for social media. Now members are asking for more substantive briefings on legislative details because they don't want to be caught unprepared if they face someone like Crockett." Media training companies quickly incorporated clips from the hearing into their curriculum. This exchange perfectly demonstrates the power of maintaining composure while systematically addressing mischaracterizations, explained communications expert David Gergen in a viral LinkedIn post. Notice how Representative Crockett never takes the bait to become emotional, but instead redirects to factual information. Universities reported a surge of interest in their policy and law programs. Dr. Maya Richardson, Dean of Howard University Law School, told NPR that applications for their public policy programs had increased significantly. Young people watched that exchange and saw the value of rigorous education in creating meaningful change, she explained. Representative Crockett showed that expertise matters in creating sound policy. The exchange became a case study in effective preparation for public testimony. Government relations professionals and communications consultants began advising clients to adopt what they called the Crockett method: thorough research, specific citations, and composed responses to provocations. The long-term impact became evident in subsequent congressional hearings, where observers noted a shift in how members approached expert testimony. Questions became more specific, less rhetorical, and more focused on concrete evidence. Witnesses, too, appeared more cautious about making broad claims without supporting data. In one particularly notable instance 3 months later, a corporate CEO testifying before a different committee was challenged with specific regulatory citations by a freshman congressman. When the CEO responded dismissively about bureaucratic red tape, the congressman calmly asked, "Could you explain which specific provisions you find problematic?" When the CEO couldn't provide details, the exchange immediately drew comparisons to the Miller-Crockett moment. Perhaps most significantly, polling conducted in the weeks following showed that 68% of Americans who had seen the exchange felt that policy discussions should focus more on evidence and expertise rather than ideological positions, a rare point of agreement across partisan lines. What we're witnessing may be a small but significant shift in what the public expects from political discourse, explained political scientist Dr. Rebecca Coleman. After years of increasingly heated rhetoric, the Crockett approach demonstrated that substance can be more compelling than performance. 3 days after the hearing, something unexpected happened. During an appearance on a conservative podcast, Miller addressed the viral moment directly. "I respect Representative Crockett's preparation," he said, though his tone suggested reluctance. "While we fundamentally disagree on policy, I acknowledge that personal attacks don't advance the conversation." This limited concession, unusual for someone known for his unyielding positions, reflected the undeniable impact of the exchange. Media observers noted that in subsequent appearances, Miller focused more on specific policy points and less on broad rhetorical flourishes. 6 months later, the influence of this exchange continued to shape political discourse. When Crockett, and Miller appeared on a panel together at a policy conference, the atmosphere was markedly different. Though they disagreed just as strongly on substance, the tone remained professional, with both focusing on evidence rather than personal attacks. What we're seeing isn't just a stylistic change, observed political scientist Dr. Jonathan Harris. It's a recognition that the public responds to substance over performance. Representative Crockett demonstrated that you can be both passionate about your positions and rigorous in your defense of them. For journalism schools and communications programs, the exchange became a standard teaching example. We use this clip to show how preparation and composure can completely change the dynamic of a confrontational situation, explained Professor Maria Lopez of Columbia Journalism School. It's particularly powerful because it shows that you don't need to match aggression with aggression to be effective. Perhaps the most telling indicator came nearly a year later, when a freshman congressman deliberately tried to provoke Crockett during another hearing using similar tactics. Footage of her calm response, "Let's focus on the evidence rather than credentials," immediately drew comparisons to the Miller exchange, with social media users commenting on how her approach had created a template for dignity in public discourse. Communications experts noted that the exchange had helped establish a new standard for effective public testimony. What Crockett demonstrated wasn't just about winning an argument, explained Dr. Robert Chen, author of Persuasion in a Polarized Age. It was about maintaining the focus on substance, even when others try to drag the conversation into personal territory. The legacy of the exchange extended to how Americans evaluated political figures more broadly. Polling showed increased public appreciation for representatives who could articulate specific policy details rather than relying on generalizations or attacks, a shift that political consultants were advising their clients to recognize. The days of just owning your opponent through insults are waning, one Republican media consultant told New York Magazine. Voters are increasingly drawn to representatives who demonstrate actual mastery of complex issues. The Crockett approach, being prepared and remaining composed, is becoming the gold standard across party lines. The exchange also sparked meaningful conversations about elitism and credentials in American society. Opinion pieces and academic articles explored the tension between formal education and practical experience, with many noting that Crockett herself had effectively bridged this divide by acknowledging the value of both. What made Crockett's response so effective wasn't that she simply defended her credentials, wrote sociology professor Dr. James Wilson in The Atlantic. It was that she demonstrated their practical value through her command of specific legal details while simultaneously acknowledging that credentials alone aren't sufficient. She embodied the integration of theory and practice that our policy discussions so desperately need. The moment also prompted deeper reflection on the nature of expertise in democratic governance. Political theorists and public policy experts began examining how our society determines who is qualified to make decisions that affect millions of lives. Several prominent universities organized symposia on the theme "Expertise and Democracy in the Age of Information," directly citing the Crockett-Miller exchange as a catalyst for the discussion. What we witnessed wasn't just about two individuals, explained Dr. Elena Rodriguez, professor of political science at Stanford University. It was about competing visions of how policy should be made. Do we value evidence-based approaches informed by specialized knowledge, or do we prioritize ideological certainty regardless of its empirical foundation? Crockett's response articulated a powerful case for the former without dismissing the importance of practical implementation. This conversation extended beyond academia into mainstream discourse. Several major publications ran feature articles exploring the growing divide between those who trust traditional sources of expertise and those who view them with suspicion. The New York Times Magazine dedicated a cover story to "The Expertise Wars," using the Crockett-Miller exchange as its opening scene. Another significant outcome was the way the exchange influenced how political disagreements were portrayed in media coverage. Several major news organizations issued updated guidance to their political reporters, encouraging more focus on substantive policy differences and less on performative confrontations. One network news director told the Columbia Journalism Review, "The extraordinary public response to the Crockett approach showed us that viewers actually hunger for substance when it's presented compellingly." For students of political communication, the exchange provided a valuable reminder. The most effective response to provocation isn't matching heat with heat, but meeting it with light, responding to attempts at humiliation with calm, evidence-based clarity that reveals the emptiness of personal attacks. As another election cycle approached, with all its inevitable confrontations and disagreements, the Miller-Crockett exchange remained a powerful reference point, a demonstration that how we disagree can be just as important as what we disagree about, and that in the right hands, even a hostile interaction can become an opportunity to elevate political discourse rather than degrade it. If you found this analysis of this historic confrontation illuminating, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth breakdowns of pivotal moments in American politics. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our coverage of these exchanges that reveal the true character of our public figures. This is how real civic engagement develops, not through shouting matches, but through understanding the tactics used to dismiss substantive debate and the most effective ways to redirect to facts and evidence. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.